Namaste, everyone, and welcome to this first Sangha podcast. Now, for me, it's a little weird calling this Sangha podcast since that's not really a name, it's more of a description. So, I think our first order of business should be to figure out a name for this podcast. I think the best way to figure out a name for this podcast would be to ask you guys, the listeners, what you think this podcast should be called. So I want you guys to leave a suggestion down in the comment sections below on what you think this podcast should be called. Now, a little bit of background on this podcast. So this podcast is going to aim to have a conversation on topics that pertain to Sangha. Now, this means it's going to be two-way. Of course, I'm going to be giving my opinion and my understanding on topics, but I also want you guys to give me your opinions and your understandings on these topics. So what we're going to do is after each episode, I'd love to see your explanation on topics and your understanding on these topics in the comment section down below so that we can further our own knowledge on these topics. So some of these topics are going to be controversial or non-controversial, but I think it is important to stress that my opinions are my own and not that of all Swayamsevaks. So please take any disagreements that you have with my opinions as a disagreement with my own opinions and my understanding. And tell me what you think I'm understanding wrong in the comment section down below. So these topics are going to be ranging all the way from the vision and mission of Sangha to topics about Vividh Kshetra. So for topics that I may not be suitable to give an opinion on, I'll bring in some guest hosts. These will be people that you may have heard of, and you may not have heard of them, but needless to say, they will have a better understanding on these topics, and it'll be great to hear from them. So I think one more thing that I want to explain about this podcast is that it's aiming to understand topics that are seen in Shaka. So the best way for you to see these topics in action is by going to Shaka and being involved. So in the off chance that you have no idea where the closest Shaka is, you can go to any search engine, type in HSS and the name of your country, and you should see a link pop up that is either for the US it will be hssus.org, for the UK it's hssus.uk.org, and so on and so forth. So you can go on those websites and figure out where the closest Shaka is to you and actually attend. So I think the next order of business is to explain the schedule of this podcast. This podcast is going to aim to be twice a month. That means it'll be released every other week, and it'll aim to be around 30 to 45 minutes long. So at the end of each podcast, we'll ask for a topic suggestion because we don't know all the topics that should be covered. What you will do is you can put them in the comment section down below. If that topic has already been suggested, give it a thumbs up. If you want to suggest your own topic, write a new suggestion. As I mentioned, this podcast is going to be a conversation. So we can't have a conversation if I don't comment on some of the comments that you guys have been giving. So one section of this podcast, primarily in the beginning, will be dedicated to commenting on some of the comments received from the last episode. So write your comments down in the section below, and maybe your comment will be chosen as one to be reviewed. So you may receive this podcast on the 30th of September 2017, but these podcasts are always pre-recorded. So some of these topics that you suggest will already be planned. If your topic is already planned, don't worry. You can still write it down in your comment section below. But just note that your topic may be covered in the next episode. If a lot of people want a certain topic that we may not have planned for, we will reschedule our current program and go with the topic that most of you guys want to hear. Of course, this is about us having a conversation, so just leave a note down in the comments if you strongly believe that one topic should be covered or topic should not be covered, and we'll go from there. So most of these topics are going to be aimed at people who have been coming to Shaka for at least 2 months. Now, this doesn't mean that if you have not been coming to Shaka for 2 months, you can't listen to this podcast. It's just that the perspective that we'll be giving will have a backdrop of you have seen Shaka run and you understand basic adhyas in Shaka. If on the off chance you have not been to Shaka, the next podcast will be dedicated to explaining all the terminology I'm going to be using in this podcast. So if you have been coming to Shaka for a longer period of time, say for example 5 years or 10 years, we're anticipating that you'll be contributing a lot in the comment section down below, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear from the vast experience that you've gained by coming to Shaka and having Daitva. We want to understand your opinions and your understanding on topics that some of us may have and some of us may not have. Now, a little background on myself as a host, just so we get things cleared up. I am a Yuva, currently in the United States, if you couldn't tell by my accent. So there will be topics that have different connotations and consequences based on the country of where you're from. So I think it is very important for us to bear that in mind before we move on to any topics. Now, the first couple of podcasts will be aimed at Sangha as a whole. So hopefully we shouldn't have that many differences in that particular field. However, when we go on to Vividh Kshetra and we go on to specific issues in each area, I will be giving examples mainly pertaining to the US, if that makes sense. We will then go on to bring in guests who are from different countries so that we'll get a better understanding on how their country deals with these similar topics. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this podcast does not have a name yet, so I'm leaving it up to you guys to give us a name, and this podcast will only be around 9.5 minutes, so please leave a comment down in the comment section below so that we can start having our conversation on Sangha topics and about the name of this podcast. Namaste, and have a nice day. Namaste, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed that Sangha podcast. Now, if you want to see more, click that subscribe button, and you'll be notified on when these new podcasts come out. You can also share this podcast with whomever you like. Just copy this link and send it out to any social media platform.